Hey, welcome back to Diabolic Shrimp, the least professional talk show on the internet. I'm your host, best-selling author, comic creator, and video game designer, Josh Grant. And today, our special guest, it's a lot of fun. Alex Shvartsman is on today, getting to talk about. I read and reviewed his book, The Middling of Affliction. Really awesome, like fantasy, kind of almost like urban fantasy kind of book. Just really cool world, and we're gonna get to talk about that. We're going to get to talk about his world traveling adventures and card games and some game design. So stick around for that. Again, if you're joining us live, we'd love to be interactive on the show. So over there in the live chat, feel free to drop any questions you have or comments, talking to Alex and asking about stuff. I love to be interactive. I love bringing you your question on the show. If you're watching this later, thanks for showing up down below in the comment section. Feel free to drop anything to Alex there. I'd love to share those with our authors and interviewees later on. And so definitely do some of that. If you have no idea what this is Diabolic Shrimp, connected to diabolicshrimp.com. I love to interview interesting and famous people from around the world. So if you want to join us in that journey, hit that subscribe button, make that thing burn, and ding the bell for noties, all the random buttons they're flying around here. And so join us in that journey. I take any extra money I get from this, I take a percentage of that and I give it to universally good things like childhood disease research and ocean exploration and cleanup. So definitely be a part of that. So we're going to get to Alex in just a second. Before we get there, a few of our highlighted books. I thought it was fun since we're talking fantasy and sci-fi today. I'll start with my upcoming comic, The Fifth Ascendant. I released my fantasy book, The Fifth Ascendant. Had a lot of fun with that. So we're turning the entire thing into a comic. So you're welcome to read the fantasy book. It's a bit of a brick of a book. It's like 700 pages, but we're turning that into a comic down the road if you want to keep an eye out for that. Next up on our highlighted books, we have In Aura, The Land of the Superior by Sato. Sato, I always mess up your last name, Sato Voce. And in a world divided between the superior and the bereft, a desperate man must find a way to save someone he cares about. But what sacrifice does he have to make? I've read In Aura. I reviewed In Aura. A really fantastic book. Since we're talking a bit of like sci-fi today, it was actually really cool, kind of like sci-fi, like dystopian kind of book. It was really a really neat one. So last highlighted book, It Came to Me on a Whim, the story of Ingeborg Anderson, child murderess, by Maria Barranco. Sorry, Maria, I always mess up your name too. The critically acclaimed book, It Came to Me on a Whim, the story of Ingeborg Anderson, child murderess, by Swedish author Maria Barranco, was recently published in English. It Came to Me on a Whim is currently used on the Scandinavian crime literature course at UCLA and tells the story of Maria's great aunt who killed her 3 children in 1929. A bit of true crime for you on that one. I interviewed Maria. She did a wonderful job of like having a heart behind the true crime. So it was like it examined the case, but did a great job. But today we're going to talk with Alex Shvartsman, and it talked about The Middling Affliction, also another fantastic book I reviewed. A bit about Alex before we bring him on. Alex Shvartsman is a writer, editor, game designer, and translator from Brooklyn, New York. His adventures so far have included traveling to over 30 countries, playing a card game for a living. We're going to talk a bit about that later, and building a successful business. He's the author of The Middling Affliction, which, again, I reviewed that one. Fantastic. If you want to check out his books, they're in the description below. Click on that link. And Aradne's Crown for UFO Publishing fantasy novels. Over 120 of his short stories appeared in various magazines and anthologies since 2010, including Analog, Nature, Strange Horizons, etc. He's the winner of the 2014 WSFA Small Press Award for short fiction. He edits the Unidentified Funny Object series of anthologies and Future Science Fiction Digest. His other projects as editor include The Cackle of Cthulhu, Humanity 2.0, and Coffee 14 Caffeinated Tales of the Fantastic, and Dark Expanse Surviving the Collapse. So if that wasn't enough of a resume to get you interested, I was like, we're going to talk all about his life, but he's been waiting in the wings for just a bit. So let's bring him on.
Hi.
Alex, welcome to Diabolic Shrimp.
Thanks very much for having me. How are you?
I am doing great, and so it's so great to have you on here. I can see the middling affliction back there. It's such a great book. Again, I reviewed that for anyone watching and want to check out Alex's works. They're down in the description below. Alex, we're gonna get into your books and anthologies and translation and card games and traveling. I mean, there's just so much to talk to. But I always think a great way to introduce people is through a bit of show and tell. Did you bring us anything for show and tell?
I did. So I took this opportunity, as I often do, to bring my dog Leia. She is my muse. She usually sits in the chair right next to me over here. You can kind of see the corner of it off screen, and snoozes as I'm working on my writing and editing projects. She is also scientifically proven to be more interesting and appealing than I am. So she brings audience members to these like video Zooms and video chats that I participate on. So I'm always happy to feature her.
Yeah, I'm taking my notes here. I was like, maybe I need to bring my cat Odin, except for he would just sit there and claw me. He likes to claw me, and so I'll just spend the entire time like screaming or something. I don't know. I'm not sure if that's scientifically endearing to people. And so, but oh man, well, Leah, hello, Leah. I was like, I'm gonna spend the time like asking Leah questions. So, if you audience, if you want to ask Leah a question, throw it in the live chat over there in the comments below. And so, well, Tuki, I'm gonna have to make everybody bring a pet onto the show from now on. You've upped the game there, Alex. And so,
I think it's a
well,
great idea.
the entire show is just gonna become a pet show. So, well, Alex, you've had this fascinating like writing career of fantasy and translating and game design, which we'll unpack all of that as we go. But let's start with like how you made a living like playing a card game. You made a living through a card game. Like, can you tell us a bit about that?
Sure. So in the late 90s, I got involved in a trading card game titled Magic the Gathering,
Oh,
which
okay, Magic.
I think many people are familiar with at this
Hmm.
point, less so back then. And I was on the Magic Pro Tour. At one point, I was ranked third in the world.
Wow.
I've played Magic in over 30 countries. And I was just my life in the late 90s and early 2000s was just jet setting around the world and playing in competitive card tournaments with often thousands of people in them, and often winning or placing in the top eight, which is like the really number you want to hit in those events for the money payouts.
Yeah,
Uh,
I was gonna say like my level of respect for you, Alex, has like risen significantly. I was like, I was the kid that back in the day when Magic first came out, like I loved the art, but I love fantasy, but like I did not have like the working brain to like figure it out. I would always play against kids and they'd be like, I think I would start to get it, and then they'd be like, "Oh wait, I throw this down, and suddenly your entire army is destroyed." And I was like, so I give you kudos for like not only like figuring that game out, but also like like competing in that. That's incredible. And so, what was that experience like when you get out there on the on the field, if you will, when you get out there and you're at the table playing cards and you got thousands of people watching you? Are you even aware of all that, or were you just like focused in on like what you were doing?
I was actually pretty good at kind of tuning out the pressure of
Uh
like, hey,
huh.
whether there is like several $1,000s riding on this one match or one game, and that gave me an advantage over my opponents because I was more kind of used to it after a while and not as focused on the result as on the game in progress. I was able to like tune out some of the pressure over time. But of course, that didn't start from the beginning. It was it was a little bit of a journey to get there. But I really enjoyed the strategy of it. I really enjoyed both the combination of gaming and the fantasy, which I've always, since childhood, I was a big fan of the fantasy genre. And
Uh
so this
huh.
game combined all these things that I really loved. It had that all these like strong D&D elements. It had a lot of strategy. It had a community. You would go to these tournaments across the world and you would hang out with people. You every month or two you would see people from different countries that especially back then. This is before the internet was as like in communicating with people through Zoom and through WhatsApp and things like that was not, Facebook wasn't really there yet. So it gave you an opportunity to make friends all over the world, and I'm still friends with many of them to this day. Like,
I
I
think
haven't
that's
played the game in 20 years. I'm still friends with some of my fellow, fellow tournament players.
I think that's just so neat. Like, just one wonderful way to connect across the world, nerds across the world, right? It's like,
Nerds
but
unite. That's right.
well, and I hope you just sat there at the table and you brought Leah there, like, and just like had her in your lap. That would just throw your opponent off. Like, I can't beat this guy with a dog. It's such a cute dog. Thousands of
I
dollars, just take it.
I wish I could have done that. Of course, she's only about to turn 4 years old, so this experience predates her by quite a bit.
Put up
Uh,
years, dog years, that she's like 50 then, so so well, that's great. I'm just gonna hire. I'm a director at a summer camp, and all the kids are always trying to teach me magic, and again, my brain still just doesn't work that way, and they all just destroy me, and they get a kick out of it, I guess. But I'll just bring you next time. You'll be like my card game hitman. I'm like, you beat me last summer, but this year I got Alex. He's gonna play for me. Like my gladiator.
I can be your secret
You can
weapon
just
for
stop
sure.
these kids. Just and so well, that's too great. It's like, well, again, like, you're just this fantastic fantasy author that has like a mind that works in just such wonderful ways beyond like what I can do. And so but you're also like you said, a well-traveled person. You've gone to over like 30 countries. I mean, for me, like, I consider traveling like going out to my mailbox and like getting the mail. So it's like these days. But so where are some of the, like your favorite? Where were some of your favorite places to go, and how has traveling affected your writing?
Oh, it's been a really wonderful experience because a lot of exotic places that I write about are actually locations that I visited.
Mm-hmm.
So it gives me a leg up in a way from, they say write what you know. And, I don't really subscribe to that very well, as most, I think, science fiction and fantasy writers don't. But at the same time, when you're describing a particular street in Paris or a night market in Indonesia, it's, you could write from experience. So I've loved a lot of different places I've visited. I've spent a lot of time in Japan. I've traveled all over South America. Some of my favorites have been Brazil. Some of the warmest, most wonderful people, great food. Just a lot of positive experience there. And Israel, because every place you go there, you are surrounded by centuries and centuries of history. And I
Mm-hmm.
literally went to the beach with my relatives and started digging up a 3,000-year-old Philistine fortress.
Wow.
I
Wow.
mean, it's just there. Like anybody can just dig there. I mean, technically you're not supposed to, but we did it anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, I was like, yeah, it's like, and then we have the new show where we talk to Alex from prison. No, not really. And so, but Leah's with him still though, so all the prisoners treat him well. And so, but well, I mean, I just think it's fascinating. Yeah, it's like, because I'm not as well traveled, but I do know what you mean by like some of these locations kind of give you some insight into some things to write about. And I agree with you, like write what you know, but at the same time, like for writers, like, because I'm also science fiction fantasy, like writers like us, like that, it's like you haven't been to another planet, but you can have some informed decisions based on that though. But so I'm personally like building my very first video game right now. I've worked with a video game thing before, but that was more on the writing side. Now I'm like the entire director of a video game. And so but you yourself come from a world of game design, both cards and video games. So what did you design, and what was that process like?
So it came from my involvement in Magic the Gathering and my sort of semi-celebrity status within that community because of my accomplishments. I
Mm-hmm.
was invited to be one of the original designers for a game called Versus System, which was a trading card game from Upper Deck Entertainment that built upon Marvel and DC licenses. And so they had the Marvel license and DC license, and the game was called Versus. So you had a
Okay.
Marvel versus DC game without them, spending extra money to get that actual brand, and it was a really fun experience. The game has done very well. It still exists in a way. The trading card game lasted for over a decade, and then now it's out as a box board game with a
A
slightly
video
changed rules.
game. Oh, okay.
There, no,
Well, because I think they.
as a box like board game. I wasn't involved in that process. I was only involved in the original design. But the game
Okay.
has done very well. It won the Origin Award the year that it came out, and it was generally well received. It was a lot like Magic, but with less luck and
Uh-huh.
more skill based elements. So it became a little bit more chess like, which is not necessarily a good thing. Sometimes you always have to find that balance because you want casual players to enjoy the game. They're the majority of the customer base for any game. So you don't want it to become too chess like, because if you feel like you always lose to somebody who's better than you strategically, you will abandon that game in favor of something else.
Yeah.
And so, so that those challenges definitely exist. But it was a really fun project to work on.
Well, I
And
was gonna say, like, there is no such thing as a casual Magic player. I've discovered, like, every
well, I
kid I've
disagree.
ever
I
played against
disagree.
is like destroys me. It's like I was like, I was the casual player, and I like to look at the pictures. That's what I was there for. So,
I think you just need to find a different community. There are plenty. We call them the kitchen table players, because they're
uh,
not the people that go to tournaments and hone their decks. They're people that play Magic on their kitchen table with their friends, and they're more interested in pulling off like a fun combo or like building an interesting deck than winning. So the majority of Magic players out there are like that. The tournament players are actually a minority, and so
I'm
and so
I'm the
they're
I'm the
out there if you
cards
look for them.
I'm the card sorter, I would just sit back there and like, just take all the cards, look at the picture. I'm like, that's really cool. And then I'll put it in like the deck or whatever. I would just sort cards that's what I do. I sort cards for all the kids and let them
So you're a
let them
collector.
tear each other apart. And so all right, well let's talk writing. And I mean, you're an editor and contributor to like several magazines and anthologies. In fact, here let's bring up the graphic of a lot of these things you've kind of contributed to at some of these anthologies. You've edited a lot of them. You have things like like unidentified funny objects. Like I said, we had like Chris Hepler here on the show some a while back. People want to watch back on the channel. He worked on Mass Effect and stuff, but he contributed to unidentified funny objects. But you've edited that. How did you get involved in like on the editing side of these things?
So I started out writing short stories because I had no idea if I was any good. And I didn't have any friends who were writers. So I didn't have like somebody that I could ask for guidance or feedback. And my genius plan was to write short stories, send them to magazines. And once those stories started selling, then I would know that I was good enough to write a novel. Of course, that plan backfired because writing short stories is like popcorn. You can't just stop with just a couple of them.
Yeah.
So I spent years and years writing short stories. I discovered that I was actually pretty good at it. And I also discovered that the stories that seemed to do best that I was writing were all humor. But there are not that many markets for humor. A magazine might publish one humorous story in every other issue or something. So by writing a humorous fiction, you're kind of limiting your opportunities, right? There's certain anthologies that want it. There are certain magazines that will take occasionally some of the stories. And then there's some magazines that will take none of the humorous stories. They just don't want that at all. So I wanted to create a venue where both new and established writers could publish humorous fiction, publish the kind of stories that I wanted to write and also wanted to read. And since I wanted to read them, I figured other people probably do as well. And I conceived of this idea of an unidentified funny objects anthology, which would be an unthemed anthology of humorous science fiction and fantasy. And the idea was, instead of, there are anthologies that have a theme, right? So, for example, Chicks in Chainmail, which is one of the series that I've contributed to, all those stories kind of have the same theme. Or The Cackle of Cthulhu, which you have up on the screen, all those stories are Lovecraftian humor. So those are themed anthologies. I wanted to have more of a sampler. So these are the different styles and kinds of humor that people write. Both science fiction and fantasy, different tones, different formats, and just create a well-rounded anthology of that. And so, because I was a really new editor, I've never edited the project before, so this was a new territory for me. No publisher was likely to just throw money at me, especially the kind of money I wanted, because I wanted to make sure that all the writers were competitively compensated, and the
Mhm.
artists, and the copy editors, and everybody involved. I wanted to make sure that they were paid the same as if they were doing this project for a big publishing house. And so I went to Kickstarter. I mean, with my gaming experience, that was a natural thing to do. I had a lot of experience with Kickstarter from the gaming side of things. And I launched a Kickstarter campaign, which more than funded the first anthology. I had a lot of fun reading the submissions, getting the stories together, and editing the anthology. And then it was very well received after the book came out, so much so that people demanded a sequel. And so it became a series, and we're up to 9 now. There's been 9 volumes, and we've published everybody from George R.R. Martin and Neil Gaiman, and to folks who write for TV shows like The Big Bang Theory and Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and all sorts of really interesting creatives. And you mentioned Chris Hepler, who was
Yeah,
in
I
here
was
for
like Chris Hepler, who worked on Mass Effect and Knights of the Old Republic, or Star Wars: The Old Republic, and he mentioned that I actually reviewed one of Identified Funny Objects I think a year ago or something. I forget. I forget which issue it was, but my review's out there if anyone ever ever wants to read that. But yeah, I was like, and again, like if people want to check these out, down in the link in the description below, Alex's books are down there. Alex is so humble here, so I was like, I always have to make sure I pop his books for him. And so, but what an interesting experience, like having to set that up, because I know it's like I end up creating Diabolic Shrimp and setting all this up, and it took years, and it wasn't something I was ever actually like set out to do. And I just think that's just incredible that you set out to do it, and all the elements that go into that. People just don't realize, like sometimes people think an anthology is like simpler than just a novel, but it's actually the opposite. I think an anthology is way more complicated, and I just think that's kind of incredible that you said about doing that. So from a guy like myself, who I had some successful like Kickstarters nowadays, that I do comics and video games, but it's like it's such a challenge, and I know a lot of people that watch this are trying to set up their own stuff. So what would be one piece of advice for someone that's looking to do crowdfunding for their project? What would be one piece of advice that you would have for them, Alex?
Oh man, that could be an entire
I know
1 hour
that'll be an
panel. But
entire show always.
I think you have to find an angle, find something that you're creating that's different than what already exists. Like if you go to Kickstarter and say, hey, I want to do a generic space opera anthology, there are a million of them, right?
Uh-huh.
So what is it about yours that's going to set it apart? But if you go to Kickstarter and you have a really cool niche idea, something that people haven't done before, and if it's something that you can tap into the backers, that the people's passion, and they want to make this thing happen, you can do great things. And especially with an anthology project, because you're not just trading on your name, but you're trading on the names of the authors that agreed to contribute stories to your anthology. So
Mm-hmm.
you can get some people who are much more famous than either of us to pitch in and to say, hey, these folks will, the folks who will appear on the cover of this book, they're on board with this project. So it lends a lot of credence, it lends a lot of legitimacy to you, even if it's your first outing as an editor, like it was mine.
Get those ethos in there, right? And so we're gonna work on this after the show's done. You and me, Alex. We're gonna pitch Leah. Like people play cards against Leah. We're gonna have Leah play Magic against them. We're gonna just film a tournament where everyone plays against Leah and see how they do. I think it'll be a seller. And so all right. So last one with the magazines here, right? Or maybe not the last one, but what's the benefits, drawbacks to doing like a shorter story versus like a full novel, like your book we're about to discuss in a second, like the Middling Affliction? It's because you've done both, and like you said, it's like popcorn. You just had to, you can't just have one, right? And so it's like, so what's the benefits of doing like say like a shorter story like for an anthology, and what would you say is like the challenges or the drawbacks?
So I'll actually reverse that and start with the challenges. It's
Okay.
no secret that a lot fewer people read anthologies and short stories than read novels. So you're not going to generally reach as wide an audience. I mean, exceptions exist, of course, that prove the
Mm-hmm.
rule, but you're not as likely to succeed with a short story necessarily. Having said that, the cool thing about short stories as a writer is it gives you an opportunity to play with narrative techniques and voices and tones and styles that you just might not be able to pull off in a novel, or you may
Mhm.
not want to take the risk of investing, several months to a year of your life building that particular storyline or that narrative. And with short stories, especially with the really short stories like flash fiction, you get to do all sorts of really cool experimental stuff, and it might just take a couple of days of your time or even an afternoon. So you get to experiment, and you get the instant gratification of being able to send those out to the burgeoning short fiction market out there. There's so many different magazines that are either publishing general science fiction and fantasy or specializing in subgenres in like different areas, different themes. And so if you know the market a little bit, and you can research that in a matter of days, you can start getting feedback, and if you're lucky, acceptances from these editors, and see your work published. Whereas via traditional publishing, if you start writing a novel today, it'll be years before it's published, even if you're successful at selling it.
Mhm. Yeah, well, and there's tons of like awards out there that you can actually get paid for your short, especially for short stories. I think that's kind of fun. In fact, Diabolic Shrimp, if you want to kick over to my website, it's in the description below too. We actually have a paid award for short fiction specifically, or excerpts from people's novels and things. So definitely check those out. So yeah, I found it interesting. I find it fascinating because I'm actually like fairly new to the world of like writing an anthology or something. And yeah, we're about to release like another zombie apocalypse at the beginning of March, and that's a comic a collection of short stories. Because I was like, you don't have a lot of comic anthologies and graphic novel anthologies, and so we did a bunch of zombie apocalypses and different takes on the zombie apocalypse, and they are all connected. But like, I found it really interesting, an interesting process as a writer, but it was also really challenging in the sense of like having to tell an entire story in a short span. And it's a great process for anyone that's a writer, because we do have a lot of authors that like to watch this. It's like, it's actually a great process of improving your writing, because it really forces you to, like you said, experiment with something new, but it also, you have to really capture the entire story in a shorter span. So it's a really neat thing. So for you as a writer, what have you gained through editing other people's work, and what's your advice for any up and coming author, like coming from like the editor standpoint?
So first of all, they're twofold. First of all, you definitely improve your own writing by reading submissions and reading other people's work for the purpose of editing it and making it better, because you interrogate those stories, but you're emotionally removed from them, and so you find blind spots and things that could be improved in those stories more easily than in your own. But once you did find them, you can then apply those techniques to your own writing, and so you get better with time. That's the first benefit. The second benefit, which is almost equally important, is you will feel so much better about your own writing if you read submissions, general submissions, the open ones, because first of all, you will never feel like your work is the worst thing that the editor read that day. I always recommend that anybody who is interested in the world of short fiction and writing a lot of short stories take at least a month and volunteer as a slush reader, basically as a first reader at one of the magazines or anthologies, so that they can see what sorts of things people are writing and submitting, and what sort of really common mistakes people are making. And again, you will feel a lot less intimidated going through the submission process yourself, because you will understand how it works on the other end of the editing table, and you will also feel like your writing is definitely has a chance, because some of the things that we see in the submission file are really, really bad. you know, so,
I
you
do
know,
understand. I'm a professional reviewer these days, and I'm a really nice reviewer personally, but at the same time, I'll get harsh when because I've seen a few that are like didn't even spell check, it's or whatever. It's like, it's like they're missing pages, and I'm like, oh, you published this, okay. And so it's definitely an interesting definitely an interesting experience, of getting out there in the wild, is what I call it. And so, okay, well, let's jump to The Middling Affliction. It's a wonderful book. I've read it. It's fantastic. I reviewed it, and just a really cool like fantasy world. And so here I'm going to share with you the opening lines that you from the book, just to give you an idea of like, because it's not only like a really awesome fantasy book, but it's just like it's fun. It's got this fun element, kind of like what you said. The humor piece is there, and so here's the middling affliction. My job that morning was to banish a demon, but I was determined to finish my cup of coffee first. I sipped my Java in front of Demetrio's warehouse in Sunset Park, enjoying the panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline and the New York harbor. I stared at the Statue of Liberty, which appeared the size and shade of a toy soldier at this distance. A warm breeze caressed my face. Next to me, Demetrios was shaking like a leaf. Dun, dun, dun. And then the murders began, as I always say at the beginning of the book. And so the middling affliction, just like well written. It's sorry, it's fun. It's got humor to it, but it's also like this really fascinating, interesting world that's like it's set in our world, sort of, but it's like it's got this whole fantasy element to you got monsters and you got magic and so let's talk a bit about it. Like, can you give us just give us like the overview, the gist of what it's about?
Sure. So it is an urban fantasy. That's definitely, you kind of said it feels a little like an urban fantasy. It's very much squarely within that genre. It lives in that same space as the Nightside series by Simon R. Green or the Dresden Files by Jim Butcher. And it follows the adventures of Conrad Brent, who is the protector. He's a guardian of Brooklyn for the organization called The Watch. And their job is to protect the mundanes, the people like you and me who don't have magic, from monsters and from, definitely, from the kind of, other people with magic who may have malicious intent. The problem is that Conrad himself has no magic. He is the Batman of this world. He is able to use magical artifacts, but he has no innate ability of his own. So if he runs out of battery, if he runs out of whatever activates his artifacts, or he doesn't have any artifacts on his own, then he's completely helpless against all the baddies that he is fighting against, and he must protect that. He must protect that secret from. From both his friends and definitely his enemies, because after many years of working for the Watch, he has made many enemies. And so his superpower is that he is a bluffer. He's a grifter. He's able to lie really, really well. And at one point, he even in the second book, he remarks that lying is as effective as magic if you do it well enough.
Well, and I loved. You see, I loved so much about this book, and I loved just him as a character, and just like I loved like kind of how you set him up, like it's definitely like got that vigilante crime fighting element, kind of like what you said, like kind of like Batman almost. And it's like coming from like I did like The Lost Boy, which is like Peter Pan as a vigilante crime fighter in our real world. And so it's like, so for me, I love that kind of like vigilante fiction with the side of like pizzazz to it. And this was just, I just thought it was so much fun because it captures all these elements so well. By the way, joke Leo says the middling affliction is one of the best reads in my
Thank you,
honest
Joe.
opinion. So that's very kind of you. And so it was actually, it really was like a fantastic read. So and I love, like, I just love this imaginative world that you had set up, and where it's like ours, but it has this whole magic element and monster element. I just thought it was fun how well you integrated that. So what sparked this world in your mind?
So it started out as a couple of short stories that I wrote very early in my career. And I've always been a fan of this sort of book. I've always been a fan of urban fantasy that doesn't take itself too seriously, that has some humorous elements, and it really plays with its location as almost a character. And I think that Simon Green, who I'm a big fan of his work, his Nightside series really represents that, where London is almost a character in a book. Same thing with Ben Aronovich's Rivers of London. London itself is almost a character, and I wanted to do that, but for my borough of Brooklyn, where I've lived, for over 20 years, for over 30 years now. So I decided to try and write that kind of character in Conrad Brent. And again, it started as a couple of short stories that were pretty successful. They sold to professional markets and were well reviewed. But Conrad, being the successful con man that he is, has grifted me into expanding that world and expanding it until it became a novel and ultimately became a trilogy. So so those books are something that's been percolating in my mind for over a decade, and that's why it feels so well lived in and rich, because a lot of those minor details, throwaway lines, they all kind of, I've been building on that, and some of it I will follow up on in future books. Some of it was just meant to make the world feel more well-rounded. But it definitely is a lot. It's a lot of fun to incorporate all sorts of like mythology of New York City and Brooklyn in particular. Like different elements of it, locations that are instantly recognizable to those who know Brooklyn, who've lived here or who visited here often enough. A lot of the action takes place in South Brooklyn, where I live. So my friends locally will recognize many of the locations, even if the names have been changed to protect the innocent. And it's just been, and the thing is, my philosophy in writing these books is, I don't write the book to sell it. I write the book to be unapologetically fun. And if I'm having fun writing it, then I really hope and believe that the readers will have fun reading it as well.
Well, that's a word that just keeps coming up, and I put in my review of it too. It had fun. It was fun to read. The characters were fun. It was deep. It had this whole like world and lore, and I loved that piece. And it was also fun. And so I just really enjoyed it. And like you said, I've never been to New York, but I feel like I've been to New York in a way, through it. So you really did capture that well-rounded element to it. Like you said, like having the city itself and the setting itself be a character. That's always a goal, I think, for it should be anyway for science fiction and fantasy writers. You should really have your setting itself be part of the character and part of the the feel of it. And so the blend of like fantasy and kind of I use noir a bit. It had this kind of noir feel to some of it, and the humor was just fantastic. So how did you go about because you mentioned like you were having fun while writing it. So is that how you kind of went about it? Like, how did you go about finding the right tone for this book? Because you blended it really well.
So, as many urban fantasy books are, this is a first-person narrative. So I really had to get into Conrad's head, and his snark and his sense of humor is very similar to mine, though he's certainly a braver man by far. I would not do or attempt a third of the stuff that he
Yeah,
does.
I was gonna say I like to imagine that while you were writing it, you were like climbing on the rooftops or running through the alleyways of New York. It's like just to get into character here.
Right. So I avoid doing any of those things very much, but I do like to walk the streets, and there are scenes that take place in specific neighborhoods and areas of Brooklyn, and I go there. And so like even the scene that the little excerpt that you read, which takes place on the pier in Sunset Park by the warehouses there. I stood in that spot. I looked at that Statue of Liberty, so I know. So I was describing something that I have personally seen. And I think that that's important to be that well grounded when you're trying to write a real city, even if you are adding fantastical elements to it. It does land that extra air of being. I mean, realistic is a tough word to throw around when you're talking about this kind of a book, but it adds that layer of, it becomes, I think, lived in is what I prefer to say. Like, that
Yes,
the
it
world feels
definitely,
lived
that's
in.
a perfect description of it. It definitely feels, it definitely felt lived in a good way.
So
And so,
that's my approach to it. And again, like I just come up with, I have the idea of the story of the plot line, and a lot of the jokes just they're off the cuff. I'm writing the story. I know where I'm going with the plot, and the character just says something funny, and I keep it in there. And sometimes I'll steal from myself. Sometimes I will say something, and my friends will laugh, and I'll be like, "Oh, that's a good line. Maybe I'll let Conrad have it."
well, and so how did speaking of Conrad here, it's like how did the characters and monsters come about, and do you yourself have a personal favorite?
Well, yes. So of course I love Conrad. I mean, he is the linchpin of the series, but he's actually only my second favorite, most favorite character to write in the series. My main favorite character to write is a bad guy, and her name is Moira O'Leary.
Mm.
And she's basically just like Conrad, but with zero moral compass. She will do whatever benefits her the most, and she has no filter. She will say things just to needle you and annoy you, and she's just so much fun to write that I had to make sure that she's a major character in the sequel.
Well, it's just like I always think that's like just fun. Like the bad guys are like half the fun, and but you have all these like monsters in this too. I just thought all around it's just fun. Like so like what about the monsters? Like what was your inspiration there?
I don't know that there's a specific inspiration for them other than trying to play with the tropes and not fit into any particular trope comfortably. So if you have a vampire, you don't want him to you don't want to like make him the same standard vampire that you see. You don't want to make him sparkle or be broody and boring and look kind of like what everybody else has done to death. So my vampires are math nerds, and they run a hedge fund. And like you want to have a dragon that's different from the dragons that you've seen in other books, if at all possible. I have a door troll who is basically like a doorman, except for he's a troll, and he's somebody that Conrad just has these like really fun side encounters with constantly.
Mm.
So there's all sorts of different monsters that appear throughout the book, but I don't have like a grandiose plan for why they're there. I just like to populate the world with a lot of these different monsters and kind of show that the monsters in our real world and human mythology kind of come from these real beings that exist, even though they're not exactly right. And it just makes the world more fun for me. So a lot of them were kind of created on the spot, including the door troll. By the way, I didn't plan him. Conrad showed up in that spot, and I just figured, well, what would he encounter when he opened that door and walked into that building? And the idea of the door troll came to me, and I was like, hey, this is the character that he could just keep encountering because he has to find a way to get into the building, and this troll is preventing him, as trolls tend to do, from gaining access. And so he has to either outsmart or like in other ways find a way past the troll. So that became like a recurring thing.
Well, and joke by the way, saying the accounting vampires was a genius concept. And so, although you might run into trouble with what Sesame Street, right? Their vampire was kind of an accountant too.
And that's
So,
in the
but
book. That's actually
yeah,
mentioned in the book. But it
yeah.
also
I
is
was like,
mentioned in
oh,
Chinese
I was I
tradition.
loved I loved it, as you're talking about it, because I just read it recently, and I'm just like it was such a fun ride. So it's actually fun to like revisit this with you, and so I just thought that you had a lot of those really fun. That was kind of my goal with like both zombie that's about to come out, another zombie apocalypse. I was like reinventing the zombie apocalypse, but doing it has to be zombies, but in a different way. And I had so much fun doing that. And same with Peter Pan with the Lost Boy. It's like Peter Pan is a vigilante crime fighter. I was like, I have to retell Peter Pan and be faithful to the characters, but also do them in a different way. And I had so much fun with that. It was fun seeing you take these like you said, these tropes, these classic villain monsters and stuff, and really doing them in a whole different way. That's like, that really works, and it's just fun. And so I really enjoyed that. So would you yourself though, like, I always think the mark of a good fantasy is like creating a world that like you would like to spend time in, I suppose. Like not all of them are good worlds, so you wouldn't necessarily want to live in them, but you'd want to spend time in them. So would you yourself want to live in the world of the middling affliction?
Probably not. And without giving any major spoilers away, New York gets roughed up on a fairly regular basis throughout the series in various
Mm-hmm.
ways. So it's probably not the safest place to live, which is mostly true of fictional universes.
Yeah.
The worst place to be in a fictional universe is as a sidekick to a major character.
Yeah.
You never know when your death will become a plot point.
Yeah, you don't want to be an extra either, it's
Exactly.
just on the street, NPC. It's like so if you live there though, if you lived in this world, what would you be?
I would probably be one of the guys running one of the magic shops in there, because in fact one of the magic shops in the book is based after my real business, and it's the only
Mm.
like real business using its own name in the story, which is King's Games.
Yeah, you have a game shop, don't you?
And that game shop is King's Games, which appears
Mhm.
in the book,
That's
and
what I thought.
appears. There's a whole big fight scene in it in book two that takes place in the store. So that was kind of fun to introduce these elements, because to somebody who doesn't know me, it's meaningless and it doesn't
Mhm.
really stop them or pull them out of the book. But for people who are familiar with the shop or with me, that's an extra little Easter egg, which was fun to introduce.
Yeah, and I love Easter eggs like that, and I thought that was interesting after the fact, because like I said, I started with reading the Middling Affliction before having you on here, and I thought it was kind of fun after the fact seeing that. I'm like, oh, that is what that was. And so what's next going forward with the series? Like, are you going to, I guess without spoiling it, because I know the next book isn't coming out for a bit, in like September, I think, somewhere around there. And so what's next for the series? Like, are they going to stay in like New York? Is that going to still be the beating heart of it, or are we going to like get to see what other cities and how they look with magic?
It's definitely staying in New York, but the characters will be visiting other locations, just like they did in the first book. Again,
Mm-hmm.
without spoilers, you will see Conrad venture out from New York to various very interesting locations. In book one, he does go on a little trip of Europe, which is not the kind of trip of Europe that one would enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
And so he will venture out again. But the beating heart of the series is always New York, is always Brooklyn, and it's certainly going to stay that way. And I think that there is the universe itself would certainly justify spin-offs, right? Like, and you could do the Watch Cleveland, or the Watch Paris. They exist in the universe. Like, I mean, the organization has branches in all these other cities, and so there's an opportunity to write spin-offs. But the focus of the series is going to stay on this. And as you mentioned, book two does have a release date. It's September 19th. The book is called Kakistocracy, which is a bit of a mouthful, but it's a term that means the government by the least capable.
Okay.
Yeah, therein Conrad is going to have to deal with New York City being taken over by a less than scrupulous new mayor,
Fun.
and all the trouble that it causes.
It already got my gears kind of whirring, like just knowing your world. I was like, ooh, I could see this. This will be fun. And so, well, like, and I was actually going to ask about like, our since you love to do like a lot of these anthologies, and I know this started, it had its roots in an anthology, but now it became a full novel. Are you going to go back the other way? Like you said, it has the opportunity for all these spin-offs. I was going to say, it can do, you can do so much with that actually. Or do you want to tell some of the stories in this world through short stories?
I do plan that, though I don't have a definitive timeline, but there are several stories that are kind of like in the back of my mind. I know that I want to write them, and I think what's going to happen is I'm going to wait until the right anthology comes along, because what happens is a few times a year I get invited into anthologies where the editor asks me to write something, and usually they're themed. So not every anthology is going to be a right fit for
Yeah.
for a Conrad verse story, but when they are, and sometimes they specifically ask, and they're like, "Hey, can you write something in this universe or in that universe that you worked on before?" So I can definitely see expanding the world in that way. At some point, I also want to write like a prequel novella that gets into the origins of Conrad and how he joined the watch and how
Oh,
he
that'd be
discovered his
really fun
magic.
actually.
So I have
Ooh,
some
here we
ideas for exact. I mean, there are very small mentions of that in the first book, so you kind of have like this very basic general idea of like how he gets his car and like what the how he gets involved. But I want to expand on that. I have some pretty good ideas on what on where to take that.
Yeah, well,
But that's far
here's an
down the line.
idea from Joke. Can we get a manga or a comic based off of Comrade Brent? I was like, honestly, while I was reading it, I was like, this would actually do really well as a comic. I mean, it's definitely a challenge trying to take everything you got in a novel and turn it into a comic, which I'm discovering through my fantasy one that I'm working on now. Right? It's like you have to. It's like you said from the editor's world. It's like you have to kind of like know what to cut and things like that and how to get that story across without explicitly saying it. And so, but what an interesting idea. Would you ever want to do a manga or a comic based off of this world?
I would love that, but I also know my limitations. So I think it would involve some really creative and talented people coming along and being interested in either licensing this or working with me on this, because I wouldn't be able to do it on my own. I just don't have the skill set. Certainly not the art. Like I can't draw, so it would need, yeah, would need an artist who would be interested in. And as you know, somebody who's working with comics, you know how much of a time sink that is, and it's more of a workload for the artist than it is for the author. So somebody would have to come along interested in this, and I would dearly love to see a series as well, because this would lend itself pretty well to like a Netflix series or something. But of course, that's the pie in the sky idea. So that I have to wait and see if somebody will bite and option the rights at some point.
Well, and I hope, especially like you said, like a series. I can definitely see this as a like limited series or whatever on Netflix or something. I can see them doing something like really fun with that, and of course that is the dream. And so, let's I always want to take some time. We're always running low on time, and I want to make sure we get to share some of your writing. You sent me an excerpt from the middling affliction that's really fun, and so I want to make sure I get a chance to show off some of this, and so I'm pulling this up. And you sent me a bit from chapter 8 here, and so kind of give us a bit of, if you remember the scene you sent me. I know it's been a minute since you sent this over to me. I forgot to remind you. I'm sorry. So chapter 8 here, like, tell us, set the stage for the audience that hasn't had a chance to read it, kind of generally what's going on.
So this is a scene that's a little bit deeper into the book, but I thought it would be fun because it's really action packed. And
Mm-hmm.
this is where Conrad and a very close ally and friend of his they're going out there to rescue the girl, and they are in New Jersey in this like really sort of plain office building that they wouldn't expect to have any real magical resistance, but boy are they wrong. And so they walk into a trap.
So, well,
That's probably the introduction. Like, without, again, I'm trying to walk the fine line here between spoil.
without spoilers, yeah, I was like, that's always the challenge on this show. It's like we love
Right.
talking about everything, and I love spoiling it for everyone. And so, all right, well, chapter 8. Do you want to play any of the characters, Alex? I'll narrate for us.
Oh, sure. Let me bring it up. Okay, I have it open right here on my other screen.
Okay, sorry, putting you on the spot. This is why we are the least professional talk show on the internet. And so here we go. Chapter 8. We pushed towards the elevators, past the curses and spells flung at us like bullets fired from enemy trenches. I pointed toward the exit sign that hung above the staircase. There was no chance in hell we were getting into one of the elevators. They were too easy a trap, with or without magic. We were almost there when the floor indicator dinged and the door to one of the lifts opened. Out spilled a menagerie of monsters that would have given Dr. Frankenstein and Dr. Moreau instant erections. Half a dozen of them strode towards us, ignoring the barrage of pernicious magic around them. They were each roughly 5 feet tall, with alligator heads and lithe, muscular panther torsos. They stood upright on short but powerful hind legs that might or might not have come from gorillas. Cat-like tails with scorpion stingers bobbed back and forth behind them. So, oh yeah, sorry. Do you want to play any of the characters? Go for it.
Sure. I'll do the dialogue.
Okay.
This may be a terrible time to pun.
I told Herc.
But I believe they bear arms.
The creatures had thick, grisly arms covered in brown fur, black razor-sharp 4-inch claws extended from their paws.
Fantastic.
Herc muttered through clenched teeth. Then the weaponized nature collages were upon us. Herc spoke an incantation, and intense flames engulfed the nearest monster. I pointed the silver wand, and it crackled with magic, unleashing a bolt of electricity powerful enough to fry an elephant. It caught one of them in the chest, but instead of collapsing in a heap of charred, multi-species barbecue, the monster staggered back a few steps before resuming its attack. Despite the smoldering wound that now decorated its fur, the nearest monster swiped at my arm and caught me just below the shoulder. Its claws sliced through my coat and shirt like my clothes were made of heated butter and grazed my skin, leaving several shallow gashes. it hurt pretty bad, and I wondered how many of the animals that comprise that living jigsaw puzzle might have carried rabies. And so we'll end it on that one. We are a little bit low on time. I love, again, like, you have such a wonderful blend in this book of humor and the dialogue and the world and the character and action, and it's just all just well done. And so, again, if people are watching this, have never heard of the Middling Affliction, want to check it out, it's in the link in the description below, under Alex Shvartsman there. And so definitely check that out. If you want to check out any of our highlighted books and all that I shared earlier, they're down there. But Alex, before we let you go, how else? Diabolic Shrimp is a very supportive community. How else can we support you?
Well, the best thing you could do is pre-order the books. The second book in the series will be available for pre-order sometime within the next month or so. I know it's not coming out till September, but the publishers and the bookstores and Amazon and everybody else really, really watches those pre-orders. So every pre-order is worth like 5 orders of when the book comes out, because it convinces places like Barnes and Noble and others to increase how many copies they're going to stock on their shelves. So this is not just my ask, but do it for all the authors whose books you like. If you can, go ahead and pre-order their books in advance, because it's really going to help them out.
Yeah, well, definitely check out. I know, Alex, you do some conventions and things, and like you said, King's Games, there in New York. Definitely check that out as well. And so, well, Alex, it's been such a joy having you. Wonderful book. I can't wait for the next one coming up in September. So thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, well, hang out down below for a second. I'll send you back to the nether world. And so, well, that was Alex Shvartsman. Again, check out his works down in the description below. Fantastic guy, just fantastic writing. Had this adventurous life as well. So if you want to learn more about him, his website's down in the description below as well. If you enjoyed this show, if you want to continue this journey with me, definitely hit that subscribe, hit that like button, all the various bells and whistles floating around here. Again, I take a portion of what I make from my books and what I make from the show, and give it to universally good things, though, in real life, like things like childhood disease research and children with cancer that can't get treatment, things like that. And I help those things out. It's we plant trees. Sometimes it's like it's everything under the sun. You can check it out on the website if you ever want to know what all that goes to. And so, but thanks for joining us. If you were joining us live, if you're joining us later, again, drop a comment below. I'd love to share those with Alex. Thank you for joining us all. This has been another Diabolic Shrimp. Have a good night.